It was July 1987. On a system called the MSX2, game designer Hideo Kojima gave to us Solid Snake in the first of what would be a long-running series of games that would span generations of consoles. The success of this game would span 2 sequels, but then wouldn't see the light of day again until Metal Gear Solid, released for the PlayStation 1 to much critical acclaim. Since then, the series has remained wildly popular, with new installments now being made pretty regularly. 25 years after its first release, how does the Metal Gear series handle the test of time? We'll talk about it right here on Downloadable Content.
Welcome to this episode of Downloadable Content, our Metal Gear episode. Once again, I am Brian, and with me we have Ron.
Hello, everyone.
And our fine person who read that intro. We have Solid Snake right here joining us on this episode.
What's your codec frequency so I can call in and save?
Ben is here with us, providing the voice.
I can't promise how long I'll be able to do that for. I need to be able to talk tomorrow, and that really hurts my throat.
I'll bet it did. Imagine how the strain it puts on David Hayter's voice.
I don't want to. That's just painful.
Didn't he say that in order to get that voice, he would, like, chain smokes?
Yeah, it's a couple of cups of coffee and a pack of cigarettes or something before the recording. I don't know how accurate that is, but I mean, he definitely. I'd imagine there's something. It's gotta hurt.
If not, I'm sure he has a lot of water in the recording studio.
Yeah, I think he and Andy Serkis probably get together afterwards and just figure out remedies for soothing a throat.
Probably. Very, very likely. But here we are. Yes, Metal Gear turns 25 this year. And, somebody mentioned to me recently that all of these major franchises are hitting milestones, in these few years. I mean, a lot of the franchises that we have grown up with and grown to love, I mean, they all, were coming out late 80s, mid to late 80s, early 90s. So, I mean, we've got a lot of franchises that are going to be hitting milestone marks. I mean, we did episodes last year. Donkey Kong, for example, hit 30. Zelda hit 25. This year, we're starting off our anniversary episodes with Metal Gear. Other major franchises that have anniversaries this year. Kirby turns 20.
I didn't realize that. Kirby turns 20?
Kirby turns 20.
Wow. Good for him.
Street Fighter, 25. Mortal Kombat, 20. Pong, 40. But I'm not doing an episode entirely devoted to Pong. That'd
be a little of a stretch.
Boop. Boop.
Yeah, if I can talk for Pong for an hour, that would be an accomplishment right there.
Hey guys, you remember that time when the brick looked like it was going to hit the paddle and then missed?
Oh yeah, that was such a tense moment.
Talk about an epic moment in gaming, man. That was something.
And then it missed.
Oh yeah, I didn't think it was going to miss, and then it just whoop right through it.
Right through it, all over.
Alright then.
Alrighty then, but no, we're not going to talk about Pong, we're going to talk about Metal Gear. And so we're just going to dive right in, starting with the first. We're talking about the first Metal Gear game that was released, not talking first in the series story chronology. That would get everyone confused.
I'll say, because then we'd be going back to, was it 1960?
Yeah,
64?
We'd start with Metal Gear Solid 3, but that's later. So we're going to start with the very first Metal Gear, brought to you by a much younger Hideo Kojima.
Yep.
But apparently still just as crafty as ever. You know, he has a knack for these types of stories. But the first game was released on a console called the MSX2. No idea what that is, having never seen one. I kind of think it might have been a precursor to the Nintendo, but probably not, because the NES was already out at that point.
It was a separate system. It was really only officially released in Japan. I'm trying to see who actually manufactured it. MSX was the name of a standardized home computer company. Apparently Microsoft Japan had something to do with it.
Oh.
So there you go. I mean, and let's not forget, you know, back then the systems and computers, you know, had a lot more in common. You know, these guys did ship with keyboards, and you know, you saw things like the Commodore 64, and you know, it's you know,
very much like the Atari. So
yeah, exactly. And then the original NES was called the Famicom, the family computer. I mean, it was kind of more of a blurred line between those two, and that sort of, I think, lends itself to a lot of why it looks like it does. But yeah, not exactly a popular system outside of Japan, obviously. But funnily enough, the NES release is the only reason why it actually, you know, Metal Gear even, you know, was seen outside of Japan.
yes, it was released in the States on the NES June of 1988. And it was actually very, very well received. You know, it had employed a lot of, you know, interesting and new gameplay mechanics. I mean, you know, for the entire series, stealth is a major gameplay component. You know, for the entire Metal Gear series, it's not the type of game where you could just go in guns a-blazing brute force. You know, you couldn't do that.
Yeah, if you did, you usually get shot up really quickly shortly thereafter.
Yes, very true. And you know, I was very amused that the traditional exclamation point starts with this game. It wasn't like something that was added in, you know, Metal Gear Solid or anything like that. It started with this game. Only without the stupid, you know, huh?
I feel asleep.
We did have that.
For those of you who don't get the joke, there was a scene very early on in the game where you have to walk by a character, a guard who fell asleep, and the implication was supposed to be that you're supposed to sneak around him, but the translation team misspelled "fell" into "feel," so the text became "I feel asleep," which, of course, he had to say right after he woke up. So it was kind of unusual.
Which end up being one of the most, you know, well-known, you know, mistranslated lines of video game history.
Yeah. Just a point I do want to make. Kojima actually had nothing to do with the NES version. That was apparently done by a totally different team
Yes.
at Konami. He apparently really didn't like how the NES version came out.
Well, there was quite a few differences between the MSX version and the NES version.
Yeah, but he apparently was not at all happy with sort of how things ended up happening.
Bureaucracy and upper management will do that.
Yeah. Oh well.
Although if you do want to play the original MSX2 version of Metal Gear, it did come out in the Wii Virtual Console in Japan. Although I don't know how many of us listeners actually have, you know, live in Japan and can access the Virtual Console there, but whatever. It was also included as an extra on Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. So, but yes, this first game introduces us to the character of Solid Snake, who looks far different in the early games than he does now. I think they were trying to go for more like an Escape from New York sort of feel.
They were basing it off of a character from the 1984 The Terminator movie,
Yes.
which, you know, that kind of influence sort of appears a fair amount actually throughout the series. There's a very, very strong Terminator 2 reference at the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 2. For those of you who've seen it, you'll know the scene when Snake lands kind of on the tanker and his equipment breaks is a direct nod to sort of any of the Terminator movies. But that's why he kind of looks a little bit different in the first game. This was a character that they were actively basing it on, whereas later on with better art departments and kind of, I guess, a fresh look at the series, they sort of went with a totally different direction on the art style.
It also introduced other characters that we would come to know and love, like Big Boss and Gray Fox, pre-Cyborg Ninja, and of course the plot point called Outer Heaven.
Not to mention the titular Metal Gear.
Yes, the giant, mecha-looking, armored tank that could, obliterate whole countries.
Because someone thought it was a great idea to put a nuclear launcher in the back of the thing.
Yeah, why not? Just have a mobile walking tank. It's fine.
Why not? It might scare some people. I like how the game is not very specific in when it actually takes place. It apparently takes place in 1990X.
Well, it was the precursor to the Mega Man series, 20XDX.
Yes. 20XD6. But it takes place in South Africa. And from there, it introduces a lot of the gameplay elements we would see in the later Metal Gear games. You have to infiltrate enemy strongholds, being very stealthy. You acquire weapons along the way. A lot of the things that we would see in later games. Also, bosses with very, very unique abilities that you could never hope to gain.
Yep.
Some of the names, though, were interesting, like Shoot Gunner.
Yeah, it was a good concept, but especially with the language barrier at that point, it was not the kind of thing where they necessarily had great writers.
Yeah, Shoot Gunner or Shine Get, but
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, things like that. But of course, as the story goes, Metal Gear, Snake does his thing, he blows up things, he destroys Metal Gear, but Big Boss gets away. Yeah.
Actually, Brian, did you know that this game even had some fourth wall humor? It was the first game where they actually had the character tell the player to turn the game console off.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know. I've played the original Metal Gear, but I never progressed. I've never finished it.
Yeah, apparently late in the game, Big Boss tells Snake to turn the console off.
Well, now we see where
a point that will come back later on.
Yes, indeed. So, again, very, very successful, and it would end up spawning a couple of sequels. The first one wasn't actually made by Kojima. This first sequel actually is considered apocryphal now. What's made by Konami is called Snake's Revenge. However, it would be this game that would be responsible for the later games in the series. Because I think you know a bit about that. Originally, we weren't going to get Metal Gear Solid if it wasn't for this game.
Yeah, apparently another developer at Konami decided that they were going to make Snake's Revenge exclusively for the NES, as the first game had apparently sold well enough to warrant the sequel, and they told Kojima about this when it was fairly late in the process. He hadn't been thinking about making a sequel to Metal Gear, and then when he heard that somebody else was going to, he decided, no, I think I'd rather do it myself. So after that, he made another game for the MSX2, that resulting game being Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, which was, well, it was only released in Japan originally. It's recognized as the actual, canon sequel, story-wise,
yes,
to the original Metal Gear, ignoring that Snake's Revenge kind of existed at all.
Yep. Yeah, I think, later on in Metal Gear Solid, they never mention Snake's Revenge, even in passing, it seems.
No, it's that game that must not be named.
Yeah. So Snake's Revenge, obviously, not made by Kojima, but again, this game responsible for later games because Kojima's like, yeah, I could do better. And he did. So, mentioning that in passing, we move on to Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. It's the first game to actually have the marking of tactical espionage game right on the box. It was released in 1990, although the US release of that game would be... well, it was released in Japan only in 1990. It wouldn't see the US until, again, it became an extra on Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence. So,
16 years later.
Yep. 16 years later, it would finally see the US.
Now, from what I understand, I haven't played this one. This is where a lot of the sort of what are now looked at as series staples kind of ended up coming into play. Apparently, this was the guards had a field of vision of about 45 degrees, which kind of matches up a lot with what you see in Metal Gear Solid, or at least the first two games. From what I understand, this is really kind of if you look at the 2D to 3D transition, that all aside, this is sort of the game that laid the foundation for a lot of what Metal Gear Solid sort of became.
Yes, the AI was very much improved. The guards could now hear you, number one.
Ooh.
I know, they could hear you now. Although, they were still dumb schmucks in the original Metal Gear Solid. This game gave you, for the first time, the ability to hide in tight spots and under objects.
Does this include the box?
I don't know if this was the first game that included the box.
I feel like that would have happened in the first game, but I'm not 100% about that. Yeah. Also, apparently, this was the first game to feature I just saw this somewhere. I'm reading the article. Something about a drugged-up space ninja. Here we go. An experimental drug-enhanced space ninja.
Oh, nice. Yes.
I don't even know what to do with that sentence. But there you have it, folks. That's where Metal Gear sort of came from. A drug.
This sentence doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It says it right there, and I'm willing to believe it, even though it's Wikipedia, and we all know how reliable Wikipedia is. But considering how important drugged-up ninjas become later on in the series, I'm actually willing to believe that.
Referencing the cardboard box, it was first. I think it came in the very first game. That's what it did. There was a quote by Big Boss said to Solid Snake in the first game, "That cardboard box? Are you moving house or something?"
Are you moving house or something?
Yes.
Something. How about translation errors?
How would we move this English away? So the cardboard box, also a staple of the series.
I don't even know what to do with that. How does that even... okay, then. Sure.
Yeah. There you go. Don't ask.
Just accept it for what it is.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, sounds good to me.
There we go. So, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, I should say. After 1990, we wouldn't see another Metal Gear game again until 1998. So 8 years in Japan. It would be let's see, that's 11 years. 10 years for the US, I should say. Metal Gear Solid came out for the PlayStation 1 in the US, October of 1998. This game is widely considered to be one of the best games of all time. I can agree with that immensely. This was a game that I jumped into very quickly. I saw somebody playing the demo and I went, that looks interesting. Played it and fell in love. It was, at that time, something I had never, experienced before in gameplay. Stealth, the way the fuck complex plots. I'd also never experienced Psycho Mantis, which is, a character in himself.
Do you feel like anyone had experienced Psycho Mantis before then?
I mean, I think that was just such the people give Hideo Kojima a lot of flack for sort of, and let's be honest, in 2 and a little bit in 3, but really in 4, some of the cutscenes and codec calls kind of do go on way too long. He really is a big fan of very cinematic titles, and the game certainly holds up, but we have to give him credit for at least being so much more experimental. I mean, fourth wall humor, he's phenomenal at doing stuff like that. And the Psycho Mantis sequence, for those of you that are unaware, one of the bosses in the game is a psychic, and he will scan your memory card and make references to certain titles. And so that was kind of the first time that they really kind of hit back at players like that I know of.
And also included in the thing was that sometimes you have to change your controller port to. Oh, I'm sorry. That's how I had beating him. Was they had to change controller port from 1 to 2, because otherwise he would just constantly read your inputs and then counter them exactly.
Yes, it did. Although I had forgotten that when I played Twin Snakes. I had completely forgotten that when I had played Twin Snakes. I'm like, why the fuck is this boss taking so long? Oh.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I first beat the game, I was playing on a PlayStation emulator that didn't support second-player input.
Oh dear!
Uh-oh.
So I had to beat Psycho Mantis the very tedious way.
Yeah, which is how I did.
Very, very slowly way of punching him and hoping that it eventually glitches into recognizing that as a real hit.
Yeah, that's how I did it in Twin Snakes, and after it was all said and done, I went, "Oh, you stupid ass!"
Yeah, you forgot that was there.
Yeah, but, this was a very, very good game. I mean, obviously, Ben, you're probably one of the biggest fans I know of the Metal Gear Solid series.
Yeah, I mean, it was what's interesting is that people seem to forget. It was released in, what was the date you said? October of '98.
Came out.
Let's not forget what other major title came out in late 1998. It's one of those games that just about everybody knows and everybody has played, and that is, of course, the Ocarina of Time. Came out about a month later. So people, this was kind of these. You were either on the Nintendo camp or the Sony camp. So most people, it was either a choice between they're going to get Ocarina of Time or they were going to get Metal Gear Solid. So in light of that, considering it came out at almost about a month apart, it still sold really well. It was very, very well received and very impressive for the time. I mean, again, for the time. Now we look at some of the graphics and some of the gameplay mechanics as being nice and quaint, but it really managed to capture a great cinematic story, and still make it relatable as a game. Was it over the top? Yes, of course. Was it ridiculous? Sure, but it also had a really important message about nuclear proliferation, a theme it was carrying over from the earlier titles, and
continued.
And continues to have, and it's just had a goofy sense of humor, and it was really good at sort of. It was one of those things I feel like with a lot of people, either you get it or you don't, and that's not to say that people don't necessarily understand, but either you appreciate that type of humor and that type of back and forth in a game, or you just really don't. And I think this was really kind of when the series, it had the first 2 games, but this is when it really became, it came to widespread popularity and really became a household name for most people.
Well, this time Konami actually bothered to give this game a worldwide release, so.
And market it.
Yeah, and market it. I mean, this is considered widely one of the games that sold the PlayStation.
Yeah.
Right alongside Final Fantasy VII. This was one of the PlayStation games to have.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, it was obviously extremely well received. It was, there's no other way to say it. It was a big deal, and with good reason. It was a great game. And listen, it's the only game in the series that has actually warranted a full actual upgrade, not simply an HD re-release. It was a full remake, and that was Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes, which came out on the GameCube in 2004. And I mean, this is when most people think of the series. This is the game that they think of. This is the game where they really were brought into the series and to everything. And I think it's pretty obvious why when you play it.
It is very obvious, and when having played Twin Snakes, I mean, you see, how cleaned up it is, not just in graphics. The script was pretty much the same, and recorded with the same voice cast. I think David Hayter pleaded to get all the original voice actors back for this game, for the remake, and it was. The Twin Snakes was made by Silicon Knights.
Of Eternal Darkness fame.
Yes, with Kojima's blessing. And it went very, very well. And when I had played Twin Snakes, I had also just recently played Eternal Darkness. So the similarities were there.
Did you know this game's actually going to be featured at the Smithsonian?
I did not.
The Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 are going to be featured as part of the Smithsonian's Art of Video Games exhibition from March 16th to September 30th of this year.
Hey.
And actually, I didn't even know this. In addition to sequels and spin-offs and such, there was actually a Japanese radio drama of Metal Gear Solid produced. Yeah, this was. They were talking. It shipped more than 6 million copies. The average score was about a 94 on Metacritic. It really is. It was just a very well received game, and it is, like Ryan said, it's one of those games that really helped sell the PlayStation.
Yeah, I mean, Sony's, at the time, Sony's real first major foray into video games, and when you had a couple of big blockbusters like Metal Gear Solid, like Final Fantasy VII, it really, really was starting to cement the fact that Sony was a major, major player. And one of the things that drew me most about this game was the story. This game introduced characters that we've all become familiar with. Very identifiable characters. Otacon, being probably one of the biggest ones, along with Revolver Ocelot. Otacon making probably one of the most hysterical entrances of any video game character I've ever seen.
Yep, we won't spoil it for those of you who haven't played the game before. Trust us, it's worth seeing.
Yeah, it's even if you've never played the game before, I mean, I'm sure it's on YouTube. You can find it. It's quite hysterical. The Colonel, Liquid Snake, Naomi Hunter, all these characters that would remain and stick with you for the rest of the series, and all with their own personal demons and problems that made for very, very interesting character interactions and helped really move the story, and that's what interested me the most. The fourth wall humor was also a plus, but
yeah, I mean, again, the concept of the very, very cinematic title, even the camera angles and cutscenes were even. What I thought was really nice was this was the first game, obviously, to feature real-time cutscenes that weren't just, codec radio calls. And to that end, what Kojima did, starting with this game and continuing this tradition throughout every other game in the series, all of the cutscenes in this game, in the games, are rendered in real time by the system. And what that means is that the visuals are consistent the entire time through. Now, usually developers like to use what's called pre-rendered cutscenes, where they will instead just, they'll draw up something that looks a lot nicer than anything they can achieve using the game's built-in graphics engine, and then just save it as a movie file and have the game play it back there. And there's usually, like I said, a fairly large difference in quality. But Kojima wanted to keep, I think, that sense of, immersion in the title. So he insisted that they keep the cutscenes done by the game engine. And then later on, to sort of poke fun and prove that it really was the game engine that's rendering everything, they even allow you to zoom in and play around and do other minor tricks in the cutscenes, not in such a way that they're altered in any way, but just as a reminder to say, yes, this is being done in real time. You have some control over this. And I think everything really, if you look at it, was kind of geared very much towards that very cinematic feel. The dialogue is delivered over the top in some places, but the voice actors are engaged and they do a lot of great work with with the characters that they're given. And the thing about the titles that always sort of attracted me is they don't really, they pay a lot of attention to details and a lot of attention to kind of the interactivity and how things work. Brian, they have a lot of polish, and I mean, I can't think of really any major glitches that I've seen in the games. I don't know if you can even think. Yeah, I mean, that's it's a lot of work that gets put into these titles, and really that kind of comes through.
It does, and because of all the plot, questions that are raised in this first Metal Gear Solid game, that sets the stage for the rest of the series to come. And it is here where we will take a break, and we will talk about the rest of the series in our second half. So stick around, you'll get some music. We might go off sneaking somewhere in cardboard boxes, but we'll be back. We'll be back to talk about the rest of the Metal Gear Solid series and the future, also cool moments in video games, on the second half of this episode of Downloadable Content.